God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. And yet, not fearing is easier said than done. Try quoting statistics about how likely your plane is going to go down to make someone who's afraid of flying feel better. It doesn't really help. Sometimes we're just afraid, and there's nothing we can do to talk ourselves out of it. And sometimes fear can serve us well. When you're being chased by a bear, it serves you well to be a little bit afraid, or else you're probably going to be dinner. And in the face of many things going on in our world today, fear seems like a pretty understandable response. And yet, so many times in the Bible, we hear the command, do not be afraid. Think of Mary when she hears from the angel that she is going to bear the Son of God, the Savior of the whole world, and as a teenager, no less. I'd be a little concerned if she weren't afraid. So fear is natural, normal, but the problem is that when fear takes the reins of our lives, it rarely leads us down a good path. I'm not sure if this story is true, but I've heard from a friend who's visited Australia that there's an island there where thousands of tiny penguins live. They're called fairy penguins, and they live in the burrows, they make burrows on the beach of that island. And so every day, the adult penguins have to venture up out of their burrows in the sand and head into the water in order to catch food for the day. And apparently watching them get from their burrows to the water and back again is quite interesting. When they're ready to make the journey, they gather together in groups, and then all of a sudden, a group of penguins will take off. They'll kind of waddle as fast as their little feet can take them across the beach, but then having made it part of the way, they'll suddenly freeze in their tracks, turn around, and go back, right where they came from. And one group will make it after a few tries, but others have to keep trying and trying and trying over and over again. And what's going on here is that these penguins are comfortable in the water where they can swim with ease, and they're comfortable in their burrows where they know that they're safe. But every day, they have to journey out onto that beach where they're unprotected. And for some reason, they get skittish out there. The moment they see a shadow, they turn around and run back for safety. And I think that we can be a bit like those penguins, stuck running back and forth. And it's not that that makes God mad. It's just that that's not the abundant life that God has in mind for us. One commentator says that this psalm is about radical trust in the midst of overwhelming threats. And listen to what those threats sound like. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear. And here the list of threats come. Though the earth should change, though the mountains shake, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble. And to an ancient person, water represented chaos. So creation was like God keeping the waters of chaos at bay so that dry land and order could emerge. So waters that are roaring and foaming was almost like saying creation itself is falling apart here. And yet, in the midst of all that, the psalmist dares to say, we will not fear. But he isn't asking us to pull the wool down over our eyes. He isn't building us a house of cards here. This is radical trust in the midst of real threats. And the world will try and tell us, that our trust in God is misplaced, that you can only trust what you can see with your own two eyes. On a certain level, I think that our culture and the world of the media depends on us being anxious and fearful. So much advertising is dependent on our lack of anywhere firm on which to plant our feet. Companies want us to buy into the myth that it is their product that can finally quell our anxiety and make everything right in the world again. And how easy it is to imagine that something, anything, other than God can fit into his place and be our refuge and our strength. But put anything else in God's spot, and it's going to disappoint. Even the best of friends, the best of spouses, your favorite little puppy, they're all going to disappoint. None of them can be for us an ever-present help in times of trouble. And yet, what are we to do when we find ourselves filled with fear, afraid of our shadow even? In the psalm, we read about all that there is to fear, but the part that keeps repeating is, God is our refuge. That line itself is like a refuge in the structure of the psalm. It slows you down. It makes you pause. And the psalm even begins and ends with that line, as if to say, there is so much in between, so much to fear, but God is at the beginning and the end of it all as our refuge. We hear that phrase again in the middle of the psalm, as if to say that when we walk through the things that feel like the world itself is breaking apart, that even in the midst of that, God is right there with us in the midst of the chaos too. Our very present help. And when I'm preaching a text, I like to think about if there's any way that I can live into it for the week, try and embody it. So what I did this week, maybe you want to try it too, is every time that I felt fear, I said these words, kind of as a response. God is our refuge and strength, our very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Sometimes I said those words over and over and over. But by the time I was done, I noticed a shift often. I found myself focusing a bit more on God and what he was holding in his hands, and a little less on me and what I needed to hold in my hands. So those words became a sort of refrain for my week. They became something firm on which to stand. And when I think of firm places, places of refuge, I can't help but picture the castles and the fortresses of England, probably because we were there last summer. And the Tower of London is one that really caught my attention, probably because you can walk all the way through the whole grounds. What struck me from the inside is that each of the stone blocks that they used to build this fortress are so enormous. You stand there from the inside and you realize that the walls are feet thick. And it just is easy to imagine a sense of security there, that nothing's going to get to you inside those walls. And then if you head to the central part of the fortress, you find out that there are all these walls and towers protecting you. I imagine that royalty would come there and find their refuge, And they really would feel safe, because not only are they inside this tower with feet-thick walls, but then there's another tower and another tower. There are so many lines of defense. But what struck me the most is that the Tower of London is over 1,000 years old. You almost start to have the sense that it's going to be around forever. 1,000 years is just so long. And yet, we have no idea what tomorrow holds. If tomorrow the Tower of London and every other castle and fortress came crumbling to the ground, if tomorrow our bank accounts, our jobs, our relationships, if it was all gone, well then one thing would still be certain. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. For you see, when there's nothing left on which we can count, still, God is faithful. And that seems like a very good reason not to be afraid. Amen.